Manny, really appreciate you taking the time to kind of speak with us today. Let's just start with a couple of background questions. I know you grew up in Ecuador, but kind of talk to us about sort of your background, your story. How did you choose to get into the tech industry? How did you kind of make it to the US from Ecuador?
Yeah. I think my story is a little unique in that I didn't grow up with tech. I didn't grow up with computers. I grew up, and I was talking to my dad about this. I grew up sort of like lower middle class in Ecuador. And middle class in Ecuador is different than say middle class in Argentina. In middle class in Argentina, you have a lot of money, you travel on holidays and on sort of like on festivities, etc., with the family. Our middle class is a little lower than that. In that I was shipped over to family on my summer breaks, on my sort of school breaks, and I didn't really have any sort of formal or informal exposure to computers until I was in high school. And the school bought a bunch of computers, but they were oversubscribed right away, and were mostly used by people who already had computers at home to continue sort of the stuff that they were doing at home at school, and I didn't have any interest. I spent my summers growing up in a beach town, and then during the school year, I was the classical kind of Ecuadorian kid. I would do my homework and go outside and play soccer until it was time to eat and go to bed. So that's my upbringing. And then during the summers, I would go to this beach town, and I would work whatever chores I needed to get done, from picking up food to my stepmom's family owned shrimp farms. So I would help at the shrimp farming, whatever they needed. Sometimes it's harvest, which is at night. Sometimes it's just feeding. And then once I got into college, and is when the computer engineering came up as a major in the university. And I did my first 2 years, and then I went into my first year of computer engineering, and that blew my mind. In that computer engineering, or computer science actually, was such an open field for anything that you can invent pretty much anything you want. Like any problem that you can articulate, you can write it in code, and that's just mind blowing, right? Because there's no physical limits in my mind as to what you could implement in code. So I started going down the computer science 1 and 2 and 3 classes, etc. And then I transferred to the U.S. because my dad came up on a job that was paying in dollars, and he said, "Look, I can pay for your college in dollars. So if you want to go study in the U.S., you could." So I transferred. I moved to Stevens, where I continued my computer science sort of education, and it was at Stevens where so I bought a computer in Ecuador, but it wasn't until I got to Stevens that I got really into computers and into computer science, etc. And I realized that I was pretty good at it, and I had a facility for solving problems, and I did a few internships here in the U.S. that sort of pointed me in that direction. And I was always in the view that I would get a sort of a graduate degree in some sort, and then work for a big company, and then call it done, right? My parents lived in Ecuador. I moved to the U.S. I get a bigger, better job, and then my next generation gets a bigger, better job, and then at some point, 2 generations out, somebody will be an entrepreneur. Like I never thought it would be me, entrepreneur, because my family comes from not only a poor background, but they're very politically left, meaning they. I remember growing up with the marching for the workers' cause, and the Workers' Day celebrations and protesting. And I actually didn't met anybody in grad school or in school at all once I came to the U.S. who knows how to burn a tire. Burning a tire is pretty hard to do. And I learned that in college in Ecuador, because you're always protesting either the price of the bus, or the price of the food, or the price of gas. There's always something to protest about. And you get pretty good at protesting. So, protesting was kind of like my thing. And I never threw red paint at the U.S. embassy. That you get to do that when you're in leadership. But I was able to burn a tire and stop traffic and sort of make my point heard. So I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. Like it just wasn't something that crossed my mind. to the question of why I end up moving to the US and staying in the US, is that as I started thinking about, what do you do after you come out of school in Ecuador as a programmer? Your best job, or the best you can hope for, is to maintain software, custom software or standard software built by one of the big ones. So you end up, maintaining software done by Oracle, SAP, IBM, or Microsoft. You're a maintenance guy. Like, you go up the ladder of local support or field support, and eventually that goes, reports back to the mothership. And so I was faced with this dynamic that I will never be able to write my own code. Like, there will never be my ideas. I will always have to figure out how to fix a problem in the context of somebody else's idea, as opposed to my idea. And that really bothered me, that the fact that was the best I can do, meaning there was nothing after that. And I had to move somewhere else, Germany or the US, to do that. And because of that, I sort of played that, I lived in the future, came back, and I was like, I can't, blossom in this particular environment. So I have to move to the US. So I came to the US, I finished undergrad and went to grad school. And then I got my first job programming with a few people that, have gone to school with me. My first job was programming, was part of a team that was building the billing system for a company called Bell Atlantic. Bell Atlantic eventually became Verizon Communication after the merge with GTE. But Bell Atlantic was the largest telecom in the East Coast, or was one of the largest in the US, period. It was Quest, Bell Atlantic, all the big bells were represented. And I was coding, I was working on my code and doing experiments and trying new things. But I also realized that I was not the best coder in the team, that there were other people that were much better than me. And that's when it sort of dawned on me that being in raw code was probably not my calling. That was being in technology, by being able to, lead ideas and think of projects and project manage and sort of, be the agent of delivery and making it happen was more attuned to what I was good at than actually solving the hardcore, in the code problems that my peers were doing, and they were much better at it. And the core difference was the following. My peers would go home and code on their own projects. I would go home and sort of, go out, go to the gym, eat or do something else. Whereas my peers would go home and like work on their personal projects. And I didn't have a personal project I was particularly proud of. That's when I realized that I'm not the best coder in the world and I do go do something else. And the rest, then I went to grad school and worked at Microsoft, Amazon, and then I started my own thing.
So, as a person of color, as someone of Ecuadorian descent, you've talked in other interviews I've read about English not being your native language and some struggles with that. But getting into the tech industry, as you left grad school and worked at some of these sort of really eminent companies like Amazon, did you face any barriers? How was that as someone sort of coming in from a foreign country as a non-native English speaker?
It's hard to, it's interesting because the barriers are not there. Like, you can't point to like the one thing that happened to me that made it hard or slow it down. There's not like seminal moment or seminal set of moments. There's always a subtext of now they're called microaggressions, but back then they didn't have a name, right? When people know that I was from that I had an accent, and B, that I was from Latin America, they wouldn't believe that I'm in computer science. Like, that's not something that you do, right? I'm supposed to be in some kind of manual labor. So there was this dissonance that I immediately brought into a conversation. So they would immediately like speak to me a little slower, a little bit, the tone would be a little bit more condescending, a little bit like the expectation immediately lower because, I'm not like anybody else. And even carrying that forward to VCs, when I was fundraising, I used to get a lot of no's at the very beginning, and I know it's normal to get a lot of no's, but a lot of times it was kind of disrespectful, where where people will make me come and make me have several meetings. They are clearly interested in our progress, clearly interested in the market size, etc. But they just didn't see me as a CEO. You know what I mean? Like, there's something wrong with this picture, and I think it's Manny. You know what I mean? And I mean, that, nobody will come out and say it. Of course, nobody would, right? But it just felt weird how, you know, people will be interested in what we were working on, but, you know, the momentum and the leaning in wasn't there.
What are some of the subtle cues that made you reach the conclusion that they were kind of hung up on you as a CEO, maybe because of your background?
It was usually, you know, when you start going, when you set up a meeting and you do your pitch, a lot of the times go back and forth in email. You know, you send your deck, you send your talking points, and then we will meet. And when I would walk into the meeting, people look at me and like deflate. You know what I mean? You know, because Manny Medina, I guess it's not obvious that he's Latino, but the moment I show up, it's obvious, you know, that I'm a Latino male, right? And sort of like from then on, you know, the meeting will take a different turn. You know, you will see it, and you know, you can argue that this happens to other people too. You will see it, and you know, I'll get lowball evaluations, or I'll get, you know, the same deal will just get strung out, and you know, people wouldn't get back to me, etc. And again, I know that this is pretty common for entrepreneurs, so I don't know that this is particular to me. I see other entrepreneurs sort of get the same treatment. The hardest part was when I was fresh in the US, because, you know, people will talk to me a little bit differently, a little bit more condescendingly, especially when I would apply for a job. You can hear the pitch, the actual volume of the voice will go up, and like, because sometimes I would ask them to repeat themselves, and not because you know, they weren't loud enough. It was because there's probably a word there that I missed or was pronounced too quickly, etc. And to me, I don't do it as much as I used to, but I'm, you know, to a foreigner, you're translating on the fly. So whatever is coming out of your mouth, I'm translating to Spanish, processing, translating back to English, and getting back to you. So yes, I do need one more cycle, you know, that the normal people do, or the English speaker would, because I have to translate. And because of that, people will just think I'm slow, you know, and or just dumb. But instead of speaking a little slower, they will speak louder, which was a funny thing. So I would have to sometimes, like, I would think I'm like, you know, I am a foreigner, I'm not deaf. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't understand what you said. By saying it louder, it's not going to make it any better. So I had to deal with a lot of that. And, you know, what that does is that it causes like self-doubt, right? As it is, I'm new to the country. I'm new to, you know, to entrepreneurship. I'm new to a lot of things. And I don't have and by not having the normal background and the stories, like, you know, you can, if you're an entrepreneur, you can read stories of people like you and say, you know, you'd be inspired by that person and you connect with that person at a very fundamental level. I don't have stories to go by. You know, there is not there's, you know, when I was growing up in engineering and then entrepreneurship, there was no other, you know, Latino immigrant who's making it big that I can go to and say, you know, I'm going to be like X. So it was hard because, you know, you have to associate with other people, right? You have to associate with other, you know, I associated with immigrants from Europe, for instance, right? Who had a different kind of hard time, but had a hard time nonetheless, right? So you have to make your own stories. And in my case, and I was telling this to John Ford from CNBC, that I had to play to my strength. So I realized that I may not be the best in you know, when I walk into a VC room and they're all sitting on the big table with a partner meeting and all looking at you, that's not gonna be the moment I shine, especially when I'm not so sure of myself. The moment I shine is when I'm one-on-one. So I decided to stop VC funding for a period, like for a year. And all I did was raise angel. Because on one-on-one, you will get to know me, you'll get to know my story, you will get to know the market, you will get to know the team, and I will convince you of writing me a check. It will be a small check. It will be, you know, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 check. But I can do this all day. You know what I mean? I can do 2 or 3 of these a month. And like that, I raised $400,000 of angel investment. What happens when you raise from angels is that all these angels are now, you know, monetarily invested in you at a very personal level because they believe in you, and now they're making the interest of VCs, and that's a different kind of rubric, right? Like you create a different kind of respect. when somebody like Sarah Embach or Ellen Levy or Andy from Thrive Capital like go and make that intro, because that intro is worth a lot. And when they make the statement that they invested, all of a sudden you go from here to here. So I use that as a way to get around the problem, right? I convince people one-on-one to believe in me, believe in the team, believe in the idea, and then that will get me the credibility that I needed. Because prima facie, just looking at me, I don't inspire that kind of credibility, so I have to go a different route.
Now, obviously, you've achieved tremendous momentum. As you've done your kind of growth rounds, or even let's just say sort of Series B onward, would you say that you face sort of the similar issues of either self-doubt or doubt from those sort of second round investors, even though you have kind of the metrics and the story behind you? Or was it really just that sort of initial seed Series A phase that barrier was really prevalent for you?
I think it's less now because we have a team and the story is more credible and we have momentum. I also think that there's real sort of like a lot happened in the last year and a half. From the Me Too movements and Black Lives Matters to so the social awareness is becoming a thing. And I also created my own sort of my own self-protection. So I don't make market when I go raise. I mean, I don't go and talk to 100 to get 5 term sheets because you're going to take one. So what I do is I try to be as close as I can to people who understand the story, who could write checks in future rounds. At all times, I maintain a group of 5 to 10 investors. It could be VCs or it could be public funds, to whom I've been telling the story. So when I do the round, I don't call everybody. I just call the 5 people and say, I'm doing a round. Is anybody interested? So I don't have to, you see what I mean? Like, so the story and the momentum has superseded the person. So I don't have to worry about that anymore. And A and B, you don't know anybody. So you're building that momentum. And C, A and B. And C, it gets a little better because A and B are talking about you. D gets a little bit better and so on and so forth. By the time I got to my Series E that we just closed a month ago, it was a sort of like a fait accompli. I've been talking to Sands Capital for a year. They've been giving me feedback on pitch, on product, on approach, on fundraising, etc. That it was a quick sit down and being like, how can we be helpful in this pandemic? And a small check was the way to be helpful. And that was done. I mean? That was the extent of the diligence. So that's how I did it. I don't know how other people do it, but that has been my approach.
How are you taking, the insights and the lessons that you've learned or felt, right, as an immigrant, as a non-native English speaker, as an entrepreneur, and running your own company differently? What are some of the things that you're trying to do to make your workplace more accepting, more inviting to other people, like yourself?
So first of all, is make that a priority, like making the workplace more inclusive, ensuring that the pipeline has all sorts, independent of color, race, provenance or sexual orientation, et cetera. Everybody's well represented. And then and then work with my team to ensure that all biases or all sort of like, subtle biases or implicit biases are removed. So one of the things that we did, for instance, for immigrants is that we don't ask about your immigrant status during the interview. We interview like anybody else. Once we decide we're going to hire you, then we figure out what is the mechanism by which we bring you to the company. That's the only time immigration becomes important. And things of that nature. And once you're here, then there is a point around educating everybody else about other people, right? Like we had a person that just joined the team and run a couple of trans training, trans awareness. So when you have, we're at a size, 600 and some people where, we have a number of people that are non-gender conforming, and you have to be able to include them too. And, I hear a lot of using they, them, because it's hard because it's non-conforming to grammar, et cetera. And, so accept both sides. So meet people where they are. It's hard to use. So we did a little bit of training where we gave some examples of how do you use it, and how do you make it easy to colloquially bring it in, and how do you correct somebody who doesn't, that is calling you by the wrong pronoun. How to approach a conversation with a trans, and you want to hear more, you want to know more, etc. Conversations are inbounds and not out of bounds. You know, how, and now we're doing the same thing, you know, on the heels of all this racial unrest. We're putting more attention now to how do we do the same thing for people of all colors, you know, Latinx and Blacks, and make sure that we are removing whatever biases we have there, right? And it's sort of like, how, you know, discrimination comes in so many forms and it's so insidious that you have to work it through the point of like using the right words, calling it what it is, and sort of defaulting at all times to power and policy as opposed to person. You know what I mean? Like, your go-to should be like, what in the framework is making this person act the way they do? And bring that level of understanding before you say this person is doing it because it's, you know, is X, Y, or Z. And it's funny. I mean, that is a fundamental attribution error that we're going to have to correct, and we're going to have to correct as a team. So how am I different? By doing that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. I don't want anybody to be less because of how they speak or where they're from. And that is a personal motive of mine. Like, that will never happen in outreach under my watch. So you just put it out there and you chase it until you get it done.
One of the things that a lot of companies struggle with, younger companies, is just creating a diverse recruiting pipeline. Even if you remove unconscious bias from your recruiting process and your talent management process, just even attracting diverse candidates can be challenging. How are you going about that?
So we do it a couple of ways. First of all, is that we set a particular goal. So for the last year and a half to 2 years, we have had an implicit goal. Like, it's been explicit in some teams, but not at the company level. It's been explicit to me. So I set it by example. As opposed to telling the company, go do this, I set it by example by saying, we're going to move the company to a 50-50 split women, men. Gender, you know, 50-50 gender split. Now, this is a little outdated now, because we also should have a non-gender split, but a non-gender, you know, nominative split. But for now, let's go men, women, which is easy to measure. And then you sort of, you put it out there. And I said, look, I'm committed to get the company to 50-50. Who else is with me? And then a few teams stood up and they sort of came with me. And now we have a team. I have 5 direct reports, out of which 4 are women. And then that cascades down, because those women in power will bring other women in power, will bring other women in power. And now we have a lot of teams being either 60-40 or 50-50. As a company, we're 60-40. And we're still working through it.
Hey, Manny, can I put you on pause for a second? I think someone's trying to come into my wife's trying to come to my house.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry about that. We just living in this apartment right now while we remodel our house, and so they didn't have the key. So,
Yeah, no
okay, so you were talking about the implicit goals on kind of ratios of 50-50 men, women, and sorry, can you continue?
Yeah, so the you know, we set that a goal and then we hit that goal. So I think that it's not just about the pipeline, because it's the pipeline and then the interview process to make sure that people get asked, you know, questions that are not dissuading them from joining. And then after you join, then it's making sure that they're being successful. You know, making sure that we track them, that get equal opportunity. So we do a lot of we do twice a year salary reviews to make sure that everybody's fairly compensated, et cetera. So you have to set up all the systems to make sure that it's not only the pipeline, but it's as people are getting through it, are being successful. So now the next sort of turn of the crank is going to be, let's do the same thing for people of color, of different colors. So, you know, we started talking to HBS, what is it, historically Black colleges and universities. So to start creating a pipeline there, we're getting help from the ADA Academy, we're getting help from Black Girls Who Code. Like we're just trying to start creating the funnel. But the first instantiation of the funnel is going to be make sure that our interview process is rid of biases. Make sure that our onboarding process is rid of bias. Make sure that when they join, we can talk openly about these things, and they have a forum, and they have a community, and they have license, and they have agency to thrive in outreach. So you do both, right? So you fix the pipeline, but you have to fix sort of like what happens when they're here and how do they thrive. Otherwise, you're just going to be churning. So that's how I think about the problem. And this is not a one year journey. This is a multi-year journey. You know what I mean? And the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be. So like, you know, I'm not like Amazon that all of a sudden they wake up and we're like, oh, let's make diversity and inclusion a core value, you know, at 110,000 people. Like, it's just not going to work. You know what I mean? Like, you do it at the very beginning before the cement sets, and then you sort of rinse and repeat a little bit to make sure that you iron out the kinks, and then you live it. And you live it by announcing it, by talking about it, by delivering against it, by measuring, by making it a thing, by celebrating it, and then you live the next thing. So that's I mean, it's not scientific, but it is what I do.